Silence is one of the most powerful spiritual tools Allah has given us, yet it's one of the most neglected. We live in a world where noise has become the default setting: noise from people, noise from devices, noise from responsibilities, noise from our own thoughts that never seem to settle. But the believer learns something deeper. Silence is not an absence, it is an inner presence. It is a moment where the soul finally gets a turn to speak, where the heart gains room to breathe, and where the whispers of a man can rise above the constant hum of the dunya. Silence, when directed toward Allah, becomes a form of worship. It is a conversation without words, but filled with meaning. When you sit alone in quiet, something remarkable happens. Your soul begins to unveil what it has been carrying. You feel the weight of your emotions, the heaviness of your concerns, the fluctuations of your faith. You begin to notice the sincerity or the lack of it in your intentions. Silence reveals reality. It removes the illusions we create when we constantly distract ourselves. Because in stillness you cannot run, you cannot hide, you can only face yourself, and once you face yourself honestly, you naturally turn to Allah for help, mercy, and guidance. This is why silence becomes a pathway to Allah. It is the moment when the heart awakens and the distractions die. There is a unique type of silence, the silence right before you raise your hands in dua. The silence between two verses of Quran as their meanings sink in. The silence right after you finish reciting Surah Al-Fatiha in Salah, waiting for Allah's response. These are not empty pauses, these are spiritually charged moments. In these moments, your heart is interacting with Allah in ways your tongue cannot capture. The early scholars used to say that the most sincere dhikr is the one that echoes in the heart before it reaches the tongue. That echo is found only in silence. But why do so many people avoid silence? Because silence forces honesty. It forces accountability. If you sit quietly with yourself long enough, you begin to recognize the gap between who you are and who you know you should be. You feel the weight of missed prayers, the heaviness of sins you haven't repented from, the guilt of good deeds you abandoned, the longing for a relationship with Allah that you haven't been nurturing, and instead of using silence to correct course, many drown themselves in noise, scrolling, talking, watching, entertaining, rushing anything to avoid confronting themselves. But what kind of spiritual life can grow if we're constantly running from the moments that awaken the soul? Silence is not meant to be an escape from the world. It is meant to be a return to yourself, so you can return to Allah. The Prophet _FDFA would retreat to the cave of Hira in silence before revelation. That seclusion was not an accident. It was preparation. It taught us that silence is not inactivity, it is spiritual cultivation. It prepares the soil of the heart so guidance can take root. If silence was important for the one whose heart was already the purest, then how much more do we need it? When you practice silence intentionally, you begin to see how much noise you've been allowing into your life unnecessarily. You start to recognize how many conversations are pointless, how much gossip is disguised as keeping up, how much time is wasted in comparison, how much of your mental energy is drained by things that do not matter to your akhirah. Silence helps you filter. It helps you simplify your life, your priorities, and your spiritual direction. It trains you to choose what truly matters. Silence also teaches you humility. When you stop talking, you begin to listen, not just to Allah, but to people, to experiences, to wisdom. You learn that you don't need to respond to everything. You don't need to justify yourself constantly. You don't need to win every discussion. Silence teaches you that strength is not always expressed through sound. Sometimes the most powerful response you can give is silence. The silence of patience, the silence of dignity, the silence of wisdom. There are moments when silence protects your heart from arrogance, anger, and pettiness, and moments when speaking would only distance you from Allah. Silence becomes a shield, not a weakness, and then there is the silence of sujud. The most intimate dialogue you will ever have with Allah happens when your lips are quiet, but your heart is speaking. Some people think dua is only the words you utter, but the most intense dua is the one that never leaves your chest. It is the broken moment where you can't find words, but your tears speak for you. It is the moment you put your forehead on the ground and all you say is, "Ya Rab, you know." That silence is louder than any spoken prayer. It carries the weight of sincerity, vulnerability, and recognition of your dependence on Allah. It is a silence that transforms you. Sometimes silence is the only place where you can process the wisdom behind what Allah has written for you. When something hurts, when you lose something, when life throws you into trial, people rush to distract themselves. They throw themselves into schedules, entertainment, conversations, anything to avoid feeling. But silence forces you to sit with your pain and ask, what is Allah teaching me? What is He guiding me toward? What is He protecting me from? Through silence, trials become lessons instead of burdens. Many people say, I want to feel closer to Allah, yet they never give their heart a moment of calm. They want tranquility while living in constant noise. They want clarity without stillness. They want spirituality without reflection. But the heart cannot be reached through restlessness. The Quran is full of verses encouraging reflection, but reflection requires silence of the tongue, of the environment, and of the ego. Silence is also a form of gratitude. When you pause and simply experience the blessings around you, the breath you take, the safety you live in, the food you eat, the people you love, you begin to develop a deeper appreciation for Allah's mercy. The problem is not that we lack blessings. The problem is that we lack stillness long enough to notice them. Silence gives you space to witness the gifts of Allah with a clear heart. And sometimes, silence is the only way you can protect your relationship with Allah from being diluted by the world. When you stop speaking, you give your tongue a chance to avoid sins. When you stop the external noise, you give your mind a chance to stop wandering. When you stop rushing, you give your soul a chance to breathe. Silence becomes a sanctuary, a place you enter so you can emerge stronger, more disciplined, and more spiritually aware. When you embrace silence, you begin to see life differently. You begin to see how Allah has been guiding you in ways you never noticed before. You begin to feel a depth in your salah that was missing, a sweetness in your hikr that you couldn't access, a closeness to Allah that no amount of external noise could ever offer. Silence teaches you that Allah is always near, but you must quiet the world long enough to feel it. In silence, the heart speaks. In silence, the soul returns. In silence, the believer grows. And in silence, you realize that Allah has always been listening, even to the words you never said. Discipline is one of those words that people flinch at because it sounds rigid, heavy, demanding. But in reality, discipline is nothing more than love expressed through action. It is the proof that you value something enough to commit to it even when your emotions fluctuate. And when it comes to your relationship with Allah, discipline becomes the bridge between who you are and who you want to be. People often say, I'm tired, but many times that tiredness isn't physical. It's the exhaustion that comes from living without structure, without consistency, without spiritual intention. It's the fatigue of the undisciplined heart. You see, tiredness can be a real feeling, of course, but there is a tiredness that comes not from effort, but from avoidance. When you keep postponing prayer, delaying Quran, neglecting dua, pushing away the things that nourish your soul, it drains you. Procrastination is not restful, it is heavy. It hangs over you like a weight, reminding you of everything you owe to Allah that you haven't fulfilled. That heaviness is mistaken as tiredness, but in reality, it's the burden of living out of alignment with what your soul was created for. Discipline lifts that weight. The disciplined believer is not someone who never feels lazy. They are simply someone who refuses to make laziness their identity. They understand that the nafs will always whisper excuses. You prayed enough today. You're too tired. Do it later. You deserve a break. But discipline answers those excuses with firmness and clarity. My relationship with Allah is not built on how I feel at the moment. It is built on commitment. This is why discipline is not just a habit. It is spiritual strength. It is your ability to do what pleases Allah even when it doesn't please your comfort. There are moments when you wake up for Fajr and every cell in your body wants to lie back down. There are days when opening the Quran feels like a mountain. There are evenings where you know Maghrib is slipping away, but your nafs is clinging to distraction. These moments do not indicate weakness, they are the very moments that shape your spiritual character. Because the difference between the spiritually strong and the spiritually weak is not that one group never struggles. It's that one group shows up despite the struggle, they hold themselves accountable, they push through the resistance. They refuse to let temporary impulses dictate long-term faith. People want a strong iman, but they often avoid the training that produces it. Just as the body must go through resistance to build muscle, the heart must go through resistance to build faith. Discipline is repeated, intentional, sometimes uncomfortable effort. It is choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. It is choosing the eternal over the temporary. It is choosing Allah over the demands of the ego, and every one of those choices shapes you. Every choice becomes part of your spiritual identity. Some people think discipline makes life harder, but the truth is the opposite. Life becomes heavier when you live without discipline. When you don't pray on time, guilt follows you. When you don't read Quran, emptiness settles in. When you don't control your tongue, regret fills your heart. When you don't manage your time, stress becomes your companion. Discipline frees you from these chains. It is not oppression, it is liberation. It is the structure that keeps you balanced, focused, purposeful, and spiritually awake. Think about the moments when you were disciplined, when you woke up early intentionally, when you fasted outside of Ramadan, when you prayed tahajjud even if only for a few minutes, when you controlled your anger, when you held back from speaking unnecessarily. How did your heart feel stronger? Cleaner, lighter, there is an undeniable sweetness that Allah places in the heart of the disciplined believer. It is a sweetness that the lazy will never taste, and let's be honest, everybody is disciplined in something. The question is not whether you have discipline, the question is where you are investing it. Some people are disciplined in entertainment, they never miss their shows, their games, their scrolling routines. Some are disciplined in their careers, they wake up early, meet deadlines, push themselves constantly. Some are disciplined in their diets, their workouts, their hobbies, but when it comes to Salah, suddenly I'm tired. When it comes to Quran, suddenly I can't focus. When it comes to seeking knowledge, suddenly I don't have time. This selective discipline reveals priority, not capacity. The energy is there, the ability is there, the potential is there. What's missing is alignment, aligning your discipline with what truly matters. When your discipline is rooted in dunya, you achieve dunya. When your discipline is rooted in Allah, you gain dunya and akhirah. There is no loss, there is no downside. Every disciplined act of worship becomes a seed planted quietly, consistently growing into a tree of iman that shelters you in your darkest days. Discipline also protects you from the traps of Shaitan. Shaitan doesn't need to make you sin outright, he only needs to make you undisciplined. Because undisciplined people rely on motivation, and motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes, it rises and falls. Discipline, however, does not ask how you feel today. It gives you a structure that Shaitan cannot easily break. A disciplined believer is harder to distract, harder to tempt, harder to derail. They don't wait until they feel spiritual to act. They act, and through acting, they become spiritual. And this is where many people misunderstand spirituality. They believe spirituality is something you feel, but in reality, spirituality is something you build. You build it with habits, with consistency, with discipline. Emotions come afterward. Action precedes feeling. Behavior shapes belief. The heart is trained through repetition, and Allah rewards every repetition, every moment you choose Him, every step you take toward Him. If you look at the lives of the righteous, you will find a common thread: discipline. They didn't reach spiritual heights through bursts of passion. They reached them through steady commitment. They prioritized their prayers, structured their time, guarded their tongues, controlled their impulses, and held themselves accountable. They knew that Iman is not maintained by accident, it is maintained by effort. The beauty of discipline is that it becomes easier the more you practice it. The first Fajr you wake up for might feel impossible, the 10th feels manageable, the 100th feels natural. The same applies to Quran, dhikr, charity, learning, and self-control. What once felt burdensome becomes a source of comfort. What once felt heavy becomes light. Allah places barakah in disciplined effort. He opens doors you didn't even know existed. He strengthens your heart in ways you never imagined, and you begin to realize that discipline was never a burden. It was a gift. There will be moments when you slip. There will be days when you are weak. There will be times when your discipline wavers. And that's okay. The goal is not perfection, it is persistence. Every time you fall, get up faster. Every time your discipline cracks, repair it sooner. Every time your nafs pulls you away, pull yourself back. The believer is not defined by the moments of weakness. They are defined by how they respond to them. True strength is not measured by how much you can lift, but by how much you can restrain. Not by how loud you speak, but by how consistently you act. Not by how much you know, but by how disciplined you are in practicing what you know. And once you embrace discipline in your worship, in your character, in your habits, in your intentions, you will see your entire life transform. Because the truth is simple, you are not tired, you are capable, you are strong, you are full of potential. You simply need to direct your discipline toward Allah, and once you do, everything else will fall into place. And when you choose discipline for the sake of Allah, your soul will finally feel rested. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about worship is that they think they must do something grand, something extraordinary, something remarkable for it to be valuable in the sight of Allah. They imagine that unless they're praying long hours in the night, reciting large portions of Quran every day, or performing endless acts of service, their worship isn't meaningful. But Allah, in His mercy, has taught us something profoundly different. Consistency is more beloved to Him than intensity. Small actions, tiny ones, quiet ones, hidden ones done regularly, are heavier in the scales than bursts of enthusiasm that quickly fade. There is a wisdom behind this that speaks directly to the human heart. We are creatures of habit, not creatures of occasional brilliance. Our iman grows through repetition, through daily nourishment, through habits that shape who we become over time. A seed doesn't grow into a tree because it's watered once with a flood of water. It grows because it's watered lightly, consistently. And the heart is the same. It doesn't transform from one major emotional moment. It transforms through steady spiritual discipline that slowly carves sincerity, patience, and closeness to Allah into your soul. Many people wait for motivation to worship. They wait to feel spiritual before opening the Quran, wait to feel a surge of emotion before making dua, wait for a dramatic moment before giving charity, wait for the perfect day before improving their salah, but waiting for the perfect emotional state is what keeps so many stuck. Reality is much simpler. It is the doing, not the feeling, that builds a man. When you act regularly, the heart catches up. When you act only when you feel like it, your iman remains inconsistent and unstable. Think of the people you admire for their spirituality. What made them special? It wasn't that they had one night of intense worship. It was that every night they gave something to Allah. Maybe a few verses, maybe a few tears, maybe a few minutes of reflection, maybe a quiet dua no one heard. These small acts, done consistently, built a mountain inside them. That is how Allah shapes the believer, through steady growth, not sudden leaps. There's also a mercy in this principle. Allah does not demand from you what He knows you cannot sustain. He doesn't ask for hours of recitation if your life, energy, and responsibilities cannot support it. He doesn't expect long, elaborate prayers if your capacity is limited. He doesn't want worship that burns brightly for a day but fades the rest of the year. What He wants is continuity showing up, even in small ways, even on difficult days, even with minimal strength. Because consistency reveals sincerity. Anyone can worship intensely when they feel inspired, but only the sincere worship regularly, even when the heart is tired or distracted. There's something beautiful that happens when you commit to small acts. Over time, they become part of your identity. The person who reads 1 page of Quran a day is not the same person after a year. The person who prays 2 rakas of Sunnah consistently is not the same person after 6 months. The one who makes a small daily dua, gives a small weekly charity, spends a few minutes every night in reflection. They slowly reshape their entire spiritual character without even realizing it. The change is quiet but profound, subtle but permanent. People underestimate the power of small deeds because they underestimate how Allah multiplies them. You see only 1 page of Quran. Allah sees a heart returning daily to His words. You see a small coin of charity. Allah sees a believer fighting greed. You see 5 minutes of dhikr. Allah sees a heart remembering Him in a world built to distract. You see a quick dua. Allah sees your dependence on Him. You see a few steps toward the masjid. Allah sees the journey of a servant walking toward Him, and He promises to come toward you faster than you can imagine. Another reason consistency is beloved to Allah is because it builds humility. When you perform small deeds regularly, you're not doing them to impress anyone. There's no glory in reciting 1 page of Quran a day. There's no applause for praying 2 rakas after work. There's no audience watching you make quiet dhikr on your commute. These acts are hidden, humble, pure. They belong only to Allah, and Allah treasures what is done sincerely far more than what is done loudly. Consistency also protects your heart. When worship becomes a regular part of your life, it grounds you. It keeps you connected even when life becomes chaotic. It gives your heart a place to return to, even on the hardest days. A person who has a consistent relationship with Allah is never spiritually lost for long. Even if they slip, even if they fall, even if they drift, they find their way back quickly because the path is familiar to them. Their habits pull them back, their love pulls them back, their daily connection pulls them back. But when worship is inconsistent, done only when emotions are high or life is going well, it becomes fragile. The slightest hardship disrupts it, the smallest distraction derails it, and the person finds themselves drifting further and further because they never built the spiritual muscle that holds them steady. One of the most powerful transformations you can give your soul is simply this: choose a few small acts and commit to them daily. 1 page of Quran, a few moments of dhikr, 2 rakas of extra prayer, a daily dua, a weekly act of charity. Don't underestimate them, don't dismiss them, don't compare them to others. These acts will sculpt you. They will become threads that weave your heart to Allah. And here is something important. Consistency is not about never missing a day. Consistency is about returning when you miss it. If you fall short, you don't quit, you resume, you repair. You rebuild. This is what makes the deed consistent, not perfection, but persistence. Allah does not judge you for missing, He judges you for giving up. And the believer never gives up. Even your salah shows you the power of consistency, 5 times a day, spaced out, anchoring your life. Not once a week, not once a month, not when you feel spiritual, 5 times daily, consistent. This rhythm trains the heart. It teaches you that worship is not an event. It's a lifestyle, not a moment. It's the structure of your entire existence. It keeps your iman alive, your ego in check, your heart soft, your soul connected. Allah knows the human soul better than we know ourselves. He knows intense bursts don't last. He knows emotions fluctuate. He knows motivation fades. So He gave us a path built on steadiness. A path that any believer with any level of strength can follow. A path where even the smallest step matters. A path where you don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep walking. When you live with consistency, something remarkable happens. Worship stops feeling like a task and becomes a source of comfort. Quran becomes a companion. Salah becomes a refuge. Dhikr becomes a breath of relief. Dua becomes an instinct. The heart begins to crave what once felt heavy. And that transformation only comes from steady, daily commitment. In the end, the beauty of consistent worship is that it shapes you into someone who belongs to Allah, not occasionally, not emotionally, but truly, deeply, continuously. A person whose heart is always connected, whose soul is always nourished, whose life is always anchored by something greater than the world. And when Allah loves the small deeds done consistently, He is, in reality, loving the person who clings to Him through them. And consistency becomes the quiet proof that your heart is alive. There is a deeper layer to worship that many people overlook, and it lies in mastering the self. We often speak about mastering our schedules, mastering our goals, mastering our careers, but rarely do we speak about mastering the inner world. The impulses, desires, emotions, and distraction that quietly shape our spiritual lives, yet this inner mastery is the foundation of every act of worship. When you control yourself, you don't just perform worship, you elevate it. You don't just pray, you become present. You don't just read Quran, you internalize it. You don't just fast, you refine your soul. Worship becomes more than actions. It becomes transformation. There is a simple truth. The greatest battle you will ever fight is the battle against your own nafs. Your biggest obstacle is not the world outside. It is the world within. And when you learn to conquer that world, all acts of worship begin to flow with ease. Without this mastery, worship feels heavy. With it, worship becomes natural. This is why mastering yourself is not optional. It is essential to reaching the heights Allah has opened for you. People sometimes wonder why they struggle in their salah, why their hearts wander, why their tongues remember Allah, but their minds drift elsewhere. It is not because the salah is too difficult. It is because the self is too untrained. A heart pulled in 10 directions cannot suddenly be calm in prayer. A mind filled with endless noise cannot focus simply because it enters sujud. Inner mastery doesn't magically appear during worship. It is cultivated through discipline throughout the day. When you guard your eyes, your salah becomes grounded. When you guard your tongue, your dhikr becomes sincere. When you guard your time, your Quran becomes meaningful. Everything you do outside of worship influences the quality of what you do inside worship. Mastering yourself means recognizing that your soul has needs, your heart has sensitivities, and your nafs has tendencies. It loves comfort. It seeks distraction, it runs from responsibility, it craves instant satisfaction. And if you allow these impulses to control you, your worship will always be secondary, always rushed, always disconnected. But when you take control, when you tell your nafs what to do instead of obeying it blindly, worship rises from shallow obligation to deep devotion. Inner mastery begins with awareness. You must know yourself, your weaknesses, your triggers, your tendencies, your patterns. When do you procrastinate most? What distracts you easily? What makes you angry? What weakens your faith? What strengthens it? Many people move through life without ever examining themselves, and then wonder why their iman fluctuates with every breeze. But the believer, who pays attention to their inner world, begins to recognize the early signs of spiritual decline. They catch themselves before the heart hardens, before sins accumulate, before laziness settles, before heedlessness becomes routine. This awareness is itself an act of worship because it means you're taking responsibility for your soul. And once you know yourself, you can begin to discipline yourself, not with harshness but with consistency. Not with force but with intention. Mastering yourself is not about punishing your soul. It's about training it. Just as an athlete strengthens their body through repetition, the believer strengthens their inner state through steady spiritual habits. You train your patience, you train your focus, you train your humility, you train your ability to resist impulses. You train your tongue to speak only good, you train your eyes to lower their gaze, you train your heart to trust Allah in moments of fear and uncertainty. With each small effort, the soul becomes more obedient, more stable, more aligned with what Allah loves. And with this inner alignment, everything in your worship shifts. Salah becomes calm, not rushed. Dhikr becomes heartfelt, not mechanical. Dua becomes intimate, not distant. Quran becomes guidance, not merely recitation. Your heart becomes soft, responsive, receptive. Worship becomes joy, not burden, but self-mastery doesn't only elevate your relationship with Allah, it shapes your character with people as well. It is easy to be kind when you are calm, but self-mastery teaches you to be kind even when you are angry. It is easy to be generous when you have plenty, but self-mastery teaches you to give even when you feel limited. It is easy to be patient when life is smooth, but self-mastery teaches you to hold yourself steady even when the storm hits. The one who controls themselves lives with dignity, with balance, with wisdom. They are not easily shaken, not easily provoked, not easily misled. They become people of depth, people of thought, people of principle. This mastery also protects you from the traps of the dunya. Without it, the world manipulates your emotions, pulls your attention, consumes your time, and fills your heart with comparison and attachment. But when you master your inner world, you approach the dunya cautiously, using it but not becoming enslaved by it. You understand its place, you understand what matters, and you understand that peace does not come from the outside, it comes from within. An undisciplined self convinces you that you need something external to change your life. A disciplined self knows that the real change is internal, and the external world simply follows. When you master yourself, you become someone who does not wait for perfect conditions, you create them. You don't respond to life, you lead it, and you build your worship around intention rather than emotion. This mastery is also deeply tied to humility. When you take control of your inner state, you recognize how weak you truly are without Allah, how dependent you are on Him, how easily you break without His support. The more you master yourself, the more you realize that none of it is possible without divine help. So you seek Allah more, you rely on Him more, you surrender to Him more. Mastery does not make you arrogant, it makes you grateful. There is a beautiful shift that happens when you reach this level. You stop fighting worship, you stop dreading tasks. You stop resisting spiritual habits, instead your heart begins to crave them. You begin to feel uncomfortable when you move away from Allah and peaceful when you move toward Him. Worship becomes the natural state of your soul, not an obligation you're constantly pushing yourself to fulfill. This is why mastering yourself leads to mastery in worship, because the worship of a disciplined heart tastes different. It has presence, it has sincerity, it has weight, it has beauty, and Allah responds to it with openings, with tranquility, with clarity, with blessings that flow into every corner of your life. And perhaps the most profound reality is this: you cannot truly submit to Allah until you stop submitting to your nafs. You cannot fully surrender your heart to Allah until you stop surrendering it to distraction. You cannot fully experience the sweetness of faith until you stop obeying every impulse, every temptation, every moment of laziness. True worship begins where self-mastery begins, and self-mastery begins the moment you say to yourself, I will no longer let my desires lead me. I will let my Lord lead me. When you reach that point, when you take control of the inner world and align it with the path Allah has laid before you, your worship transforms, your heart transforms, and your entire life transforms, and the soul finally discovers what it means to be free.